The morning sky over Seoul G7 was not blue anymore. It had turned a sickly yellow-green as the crop blight spread through the air. Taiwan stood at the edge of the main field, his shoulders heavy with worry. 6 months ago, these fields were full of golden grain. Now they were brown and dead. "Leader Taiwan," called a voice behind him. "The daily report is ready." Taiwan turned to see Neri, the colony's head scientist. Her face was thin. Everyone's face was thin now. "How bad?" he asked. "We have food for 30 more days," she said. Her voice was flat, like someone too tired to show fear. "The backup fields in Sector 4 are showing signs of the blight too." Taiwan nodded slowly. "And the council?" "No answer to our last 5 messages." He wasn't surprised. The Galactic Council had been ignoring their calls for help for weeks now. The Hanjin people were not important enough. Their small farming colony was too far from the main trade routes. They were low priority. "The people need to hear something, Taiwan," Neri said. "They're scared." "I know. I'll speak to them tonight." Back in the colony's central building, Taiwan sat at his desk and recorded another message to the council. "This is Colony Leader Taiwan of Seoul G7. Our situation is now critical. The blight has destroyed 80% of our crops. We have food for only 1 month. We need emergency supplies and medical aid. Our children are getting sick. Please respond." He sent the message, knowing it would join all the others. Ignored. Forgotten. That night, Taiwan stood before the colony's 3,000 people in the main hall. Their faces looked up at him, hoping for good news he didn't have. "Friends," he began, "I must be honest. The council has not answered our calls for help. We must cut food rations again." A low murmur moved through the crowd. A woman in the front row held a small baby who was crying. "But we will not give up," Taiwan continued. "We are Hanjin. We have faced hard times before. We will." He was cut off by a loud beeping sound. The colony's communication officer, Jun, rushed into the hall. "Leader, a ship has entered our orbit." Hope flashed across the room. "The council," someone shouted. Jun shook his head. "No, it's a human vessel." The crowd went quiet. Humans were new to space travel. They had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago. Many species looked down on them. "They're hailing us," Jun said. "They want to speak with our leader." Minutes later, Taiwan stood before the communication screen. A human woman with short black hair looked back at him. "Colony Leader Taiwan, I'm Commander Park of the Earth ship Hopebringer. We intercepted your distress calls to the council." Taiwan blinked in surprise. "You intercepted our calls?" Commander Park nodded. "The council's communication channels aren't as private as they think. We've been monitoring their ignored messages list." She smiled slightly. "We do that a lot. They ignore us too." "Why are you here?" Taiwan asked. "We have 50 tons of emergency food supplies. We have medicine. And we have 7 agricultural scientists who specialize in fighting crop blights." Her face grew serious. "We know what it's like to ask for help and hear nothing but silence." Taiwan couldn't speak for a moment. "The council forbids unauthorized aid between species. You could be punished." Commander Park shrugged. "Some rules matter less than doing what's right. We're sending down landing coordinates now. Our first shuttle will arrive in 20 minutes. After the screen went dark, Neri stepped forward. Her eyes were wet. "Why would they help us? They don't even know us." Taiwan looked out the window where, high above, the lights of a human ship now shone like a new star. "I don't know," he said softly. "But I think we're about to learn something important about humans." 50 years earlier, the Grand Meeting Hall on planet Jarun was filled with representatives from across the galaxy. It was a special day. Humans had finally developed faster than light travel and were being formally introduced to the Galactic Council. Ambassador Jun of the Hanjin stood quietly at the back of the room. At 65 years old, he was young for an ambassador, but he watched the proceedings with wise eyes. "Another primitive species seeking admission," whispered Delegate Voss, a tall blue-skinned alien standing next to him. "They still use combustion engines on most of their planet. They'd reached the stars in half the time it took most of us," Jun replied softly. Voss made a dismissive sound. "They will be ranked as a Tier 3 civilization at best, barely worth trading with." On the main floor, the human delegation was being introduced. Their leader, a woman named Kim, stood straight and proud. She wore a simple blue uniform without the flashy decorations other species favored. "Humans bring nothing of value," Voss continued. "No special resources, no advanced technology." Jun studied the humans carefully. "I see something different," he said. Later that day, when most delegates were attending a formal dinner, Jun made his way to the small rooms given to the human delegation. He knocked on the door. Kim opened it, looking surprised. "Ambassador Jun, isn't it? Why aren't you at the dinner?" "Those events are for show," Jun said. "Real connections happen in quiet conversations. May I come in?" The human room was simple. Unlike other species who brought luxury items to display their status, the humans had set up a practical work area with maps and charts. "Your people are farmers, are they not?" Kim asked, offering Jun a chair. Jun nodded. "For many generations, the Hanjin cultivate crops on 17 worlds, but lately, we have had troubles." "What kind of troubles?" "The larger species control the trade routes. They set prices that hurt smaller worlds. Our colonies struggle to survive." Kim nodded. "Sounds familiar. Earth had similar problems between nations before we united." They talked for hours. Jun learned that humans, despite their primitive status, had solved many agricultural problems on their crowded planet. They had developed hardy crops and efficient farming methods born from necessity. "Your council delegates say you have nothing to offer," Jun said finally. "But I think they are wrong. The Hanjin need practical solutions, not fancy technology." Kim smiled. "And humans need friends who understand what it's like to be dismissed." The next day, to everyone's shock, Jun announced the first official trade agreement between the Hanjin and humans. The council chamber erupted in laughter. "Trading with Tier 3 primitives." One delegate mocked. "What can they possibly offer?" Jun stood firm. "They offer what we need, not what you think is valuable." Over the next 5 years, human agricultural experts visited Hanjin worlds. They helped create stronger crop varieties and better farming tools. In return, the Hanjin shared their knowledge of star maps and space weather patterns. "You saw something in us that others didn't," Kim said to Jun during a harvest festival on a Hanjin colony world. They watched human and Hanjin children playing together in fields of golden grain. "I saw people who solve problems instead of just talking about them," Jun replied. "I saw people who remember what it was like to struggle." Neither of them could know that one day this unlikely friendship would save the Hanjin people from extinction. Neither could guess that on a distant colony called HFY 7, 50 years in the future, the seeds of trust they planted would grow into salvation. But as they stood watching the children play, Jun felt something rare in galactic politics. The Galactic Council chamber was huge. Tall windows showed the stars outside. 500 delegates from different worlds sat in rising circles, like a giant bowl with the speaking floor at the bottom. Representative Han of the Hanjin stood on that floor now. He was tired. For 3 days, he had been asking for help. For 3 days, the council had been finding reasons to say no. "Members of the council," Han said, his voice growing hoarse, "the blight has now spread to 3 Hanjin colony worlds. Not just HFY 7, but also Dantu and Jinri 9. Millions of my people face starvation." High above, in the first circle where the most powerful species sat, Councillor Jen tapped his long fingers on the table. He was from the Makari, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. "We have reviewed your request, Representative Han," Jen said. His voice was cold and smooth. "The Council has many demands on its resources. Many worlds need help. But the situation is desperate, Han said. Our children are already going hungry. We need emergency food supplies. We need medical teams. Counselor Jen looked down at his screen. According to our classification system, the Hanjin are a tertiary species with limited economic output. Your worlds provide only 0.27% of galactic food production. Han felt his face grow hot. You're saying we don't matter enough. I am saying, Jen replied calmly, that we must prioritize our resources. Aid will be directed to primary and secondary worlds first. From the third circle, where less powerful worlds sat, a human delegate named Sung stood up. Point of order, she called. The Council Charter specifically states that all member species have equal right to emergency assistance. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The human was right. Counselor Zhen smiled thinly. The Charter also gives the Council the right to determine what constitutes an emergency. After careful review, we have classified the Hanjin situation as an internal matter. Han couldn't believe what he was hearing. Internal? How is a blight that came from space internal? Your farming practices should have included better quarantine protocols. Another counselor said, the Council is not responsible for local management failures. We will take a vote, Zhen announced. All in favor of classifying the Hanjin blight as a non-emergency internal matter. Nearly all the delegates from the first and second circles raised their hands. The vote was quick and brutal. The motion passes, Zhen said. Representative Han, you may submit a request for routine economic assistance. Such requests typically process within 12 to 18 months. Han stood frozen. 12 to 18 months. By then, his people would be dead. You're condemning us, he said quietly. You are being dramatic, Zhen replied. Your people can import food from commercial sources. With what money? The blight destroyed our only export. The counselor was already looking at the next item on his agenda. This matter is closed. As Han walked out of the chamber, the human delegate Sung caught up with him. I'm sorry, she said. That wasn't right. Han nodded, too tired to speak. I sent word to Earth. Sung continued, lowering her voice. We don't have much, but what we have, we'll share. The Council would never approve direct aid between species, Han said. They'll sanction your world. Sung smiled slightly. Humans have gotten pretty good at not asking permission. She touched his arm gently. Don't give up hope. We remember our friends. As she walked away, Han watched her go with confusion. Humans were still new to the galactic community. They needed allies, not burdens. Why would they risk the Council's anger to help the Hanjin? He didn't know that at that very moment, human ships were already changing course, heading for Hanjin space, carrying seeds of hope along with food and medicine. He didn't know that humanity had decided to stand beside them when the galaxy turned its back. Admiral Sung walked quickly down the long hallway of Earth Command. Staff members moved out of her way. They could tell by her face that something important was happening. She entered the main control room, where 20 officers worked at their stations. Screens covered the walls, showing ships and star maps. Report, she said to Commander Lee. We have 7 ships ready to go, Lee said. 3 more can be ready in 2 days. Sung nodded. What about supplies? Lee handed her a tablet. We've collected 200 tons of emergency food. The farming colonies on Mars and Europa have donated seed stocks. The Medical Corps has assembled 15 teams. It's not enough, Sung said quietly. The Hanjin have millions of people across 3 affected worlds. It's all we have, Lee replied. We're still rebuilding after our own food shortages last year. Sung looked at the main screen, which showed the locations of the Hanjin colony worlds. They were far from Earth, on the outer edge of human space. What about the scientists? She asked. 30 volunteers. They've been studying the blight data that Representative Han shared. They think they might be able to develop resistant crops, but it will take time. A young officer approached them. Admiral, Incoming message from the Galactic Council. Sung sighed. Put it through. The main screen changed to show Counselor Zhen's face. He didn't look happy. Admiral Sung, he said coldly. The Council has received reports that Earth is preparing ships to send to Hanjin space. That's correct, Sung replied. This is a direct violation of Council directive. The Hanjin situation has been classified as an internal matter. Outside interference is not permitted. Sung kept her face calm. With respect, Counselor, Earth does not recognize that classification. We're sending humanitarian aid to our friends. Zhen's eyes narrowed. If Earth proceeds, there will be consequences. Your trade routes could be restricted. Your petition for second circle status will certainly be denied. The room went quiet. Earth had been working for years to move up from the third circle. Better status meant better trade deals and more respect. Are you threatening us for helping people in need? Sung asked. I am informing you of policy, Zhen replied. The Council maintains order by ensuring all species follow proper procedures. Sung looked around at her officers. They were watching, waiting for her decision. She thought of what Representative Han had said about his people starving. The ships will launch as planned, she said firmly. Zhen's face darkened. Then Earth will face sanctions. This conversation is documented. The screen went black. Commander Lee stepped closer. Admiral, should we reconsider? We can't afford to lose our trade agreements. Sung shook her head. My grandmother told me stories about Earth's old days, how nations would sometimes turn away from each other's suffering, how they'd say, it's not our problem when people were dying. She turned to face the room. We promised ourselves we wouldn't bring that thinking to the stars. We promised we'd be better. She touched a button on the control panel. Attention all ships. This is Admiral Sung. Our mission is now officially designated Operation Good Neighbor. Launch sequence begins in 3 hours. As officers hurried to prepare, Lee asked quietly, why that name? Because that's what we're doing, Sung replied. Being good neighbors in a galaxy it seems to have forgotten how. On the other side of the room, an officer called out, Admiral, we're getting messages from private citizens. People are donating personal food rations. Medical students are volunteering. Another officer raised his hand. The colony on Titan is sending their entire seed vault, ma'am. Sung felt something warm in her chest. Pride. See, Commander, she said, that's humanity at its best. When others build walls, we build bridges. As they worked through the night, news spread across Earth. By morning, Operation Good Neighbor wasn't just a military mission anymore. It had become a movement. The sun was setting on Seolgi 7 as Jae-ho walked through the fields. He wore a simple white suit that protected him from the blight. 3 weeks had passed since the human ships arrived. The colony still struggled, but things were changing. Jae-ho stopped at a small test plot where new plants were growing. They were short but strong, with thick stems and broad leaves. He knelt down to check them. How are they doing? Asked a voice behind him. Jae-ho turned to see Nari, the Hanjin scientist. She wore her own protective suit, but even through the clear mask, he could see how tired she looked. Better than expected, Jae-ho said. The modified seeds are taking root. They're fighting the blight. Nari knelt beside him. Her fingers gently touched a green leaf. Our traditional crops died within days of planting. These have survived 3 weeks. They're a hybrid, Jae-ho explained. We combined your Hanjin grain with earth wheat. The wheat has natural resistance to similar blights. Nari looked up at the field of test plots. 50 small squares of land, each with different plant varieties. Some were dying, but many were growing. You brought these seeds from Earth, she asked. Jae-ho nodded. From all over, every farming colony sent their strongest varieties. Some are thousands of years old, passed down through generations. They walked together through the field, checking each plot and making notes. The work was careful and slow. One mistake could mean wasted time, and time was something the colony didn't have. The main food supplies from your ships will last another month, Neri said. After that, by then, we'll know which hybrids work best. Jai-Ho finished. We'll plant the entire north field. As they worked, Neri told Jai-Ho about Hanjin farming methods. Their people had farmed for thousands of years. They had deep knowledge of soil and seasons. Jai-Ho shared human approaches. Earth had faced its own food crisis and had developed creative solutions. Our ways are different, Neri said, but together, they're stronger. When darkness fell, they returned to the colony center. Families were gathered in the main hall for the evening meal. Human crew members served food alongside Hanjin workers. Children from both species played together. Jai-Ho sat down with a small bowl of soup. Food was still strictly rationed. As he ate, he noticed a young Hanjin girl watching him from a nearby table. She was thin, with large eyes that seemed too big for her face. Neri sat beside him. "That's my daughter, Min," she said quietly. "She's been sick. The doctors say she needs more protein." Jai-Ho looked at his soup, then at the child. Without hesitation, he stood up and walked to Min's table. He placed his bowl in front of her. "Hello, Min," he said with a smile. "I'm not very hungry tonight. Would you help me finish this?" The girl looked at her mother, who nodded. Min began to eat the soup slowly. Later, as Jai-Ho prepared to return to his ship, Neri approached him. "You gave your ration to Min," she said. Jai-Ho shrugged. "She needs it more than I do. But you're hungry too. Everyone is hungry." Jai-Ho looked up at the night sky where human ships orbited the planet. "My grandfather used to tell me a story. Long ago on Earth, there was a great famine. People in one village were starving. A traveler came with only 5 pieces of bread, not enough to feed everyone. Instead of keeping it, he shared. It wasn't enough, but it gave people hope." "Did they survive?" Nari asked. "Yes," Jai-Ho said, "because when people saw him share, they found food they had hidden. They shared too. Together, they had enough." Nari touched his arm. "Thank you. Not just for Min, for everything." That night, as Jai-Ho worked late in the research lab, he received news that the first harvest from a test plot was ready. It wasn't much, just a handful of grain. But it was healthy, strong, blight-resistant. It was enough to plant a new field. It was enough to give hope. Captain Du stood on the bridge of his small cargo ship, the Swift Mercy. The ship was hiding behind a moon, engines silent. On the main screen, a patrol vessel from the Makari passed slowly through the area. "They're scanning for us," said his first officer, Jin. "Third patrol this week." Du nodded. "The Council is getting serious about stopping aid shipments." For 2 months now, human ships had been bringing supplies to Hanjin colonies. At first, they traveled openly. Then the Council imposed trade sanctions against Earth. Now, Council species were actively hunting human vessels. "Patrol is moving away," Jin reported. "We have a clear path to Jinri 9. "Take us in," Du ordered. "Keep us low and quiet." The Swift Mercy had once been a simple transport ship. Now it was painted black with special materials that absorbed scanner signals. Its engines had been modified to run nearly silent. It was a shadow ship, designed to deliver help without being seen. As they approached Jinri 9, Du received a message from Earth Command. "Captain, situation update," said Commander Park's voice. "The Council has seized 2 of our supply ships near Dawn 2. Crews are being held for questioning." Du felt his stomach tighten. Casualties? None. But the Council has frozen all human trade accounts at central banking. We can no longer buy supplies through official markets. This was bad news. Earth was not rich in resources. They depended on trade. "What are our orders?" Du asked. "Continue the mission," Park replied firmly. "Other species are beginning to help in secret. The Teleri have offered medical supplies. Even some Makari citizens are quietly donating food." After landing on Jinri 9, Du supervised the unloading of cargo. 400 tons of basic food supplies. 300 seed packages of blight-resistant crops. The Hanjin colony leader, an older man named Quan, greeted him with tears in his eyes. "The council told us no more ships were coming," Quan said. "They said Earth had abandoned us after the sanctions." Du smiled. "They don't understand humans very well." As they talked, a young Hanjin woman ran up to them. "Ships," she cried, "coming from the north." Council markings. Du turned to his crew. "Back to the ship. Quick." But before they could reach the Swift Mercy, 3 patrol vessels landed nearby. Armed officers from the Zeldar species, known for their strict enforcement of council rules, marched toward them. "Prepare to be boarded for inspection," the lead officer called. "Any resistance will be met with force." Du stood his ground. "This is a humanitarian mission. We carry no weapons." "You violate council directives," the officer said. "Your cargo will be seized. Your ship impounded." Suddenly, a new voice spoke. "That won't be necessary." An older human man walked forward. He wore a simple brown jacket with old military patches. 20 more humans, all older, stood behind him. "Colonel Yoon," Du said in surprise. "What are you doing here?" Yoon smiled. "Retired veterans have little to do these days. We thought we'd visit some distant colonies." The Zeldar officer looked confused. "Who are these people?" "Former Earth Defense Force," Yoon explained calmly. "All retired. All volunteers." He gestured to the Swift Mercy. "That ship and its cargo are under our protection." The officer hesitated. Confronting cargo crews was one thing. Confronting military veterans was another. "You have 1 hour to leave this planet," the officer said finally. "After that, we will take action." After the patrol ships withdrew to orbit, Du turned to Yoon. "They'll be back with more ships." "We know," Yoon said. "That's why we're staying. You unload your cargo and go get more. We'll make sure it reaches the people who need it." Du studied the old soldiers. This could get dangerous. Colonel Yoon looked out at the hungry Hanjin families gathering nearby. "Some things matter more than safety," he said quietly. "Some lines must be drawn. We may be old, but we remember what it means to stand beside friends." That night, as the Swift Mercy slipped away from Jinri 9, Du saw lights blinking from the surface. The old soldiers were setting up defenses. Not to fight, but to protect. The message was clear. Humanity would not abandon its friends, no matter the cost. 6 months had passed since the first human ships arrived at Seoul G7. In the main field outside the colony center, Tadwan walked with Commander Park among rows of healthy crops. The plants stood tall, their golden heads heavy with grain. "I never thought I would see this again," Tadwan said, touching one of the plants. 6 months ago, everything was dead." Commander Park nodded. "The hybrid crops are even stronger than we hoped. Jiho says they contain the best qualities of both Hanjin and Earth grains." They stopped at the edge of the field where workers were harvesting. Humans and Hanjin worked side by side, talking and laughing together. Children ran between the rows, helping to gather fallen grain. "The first harvest will feed everyone for 3 months," Tadwan said. "And we have enough seeds for all 3 Hanjin worlds." Park smiled. "Earth has received your transmission about the success. It's already spreading across the galaxy." This was true. News of the human-Hanjin cooperation had traveled fast. Images of the healthy fields on Seoul G7 had been shared on communication channels across many worlds. People were talking about how a small, primitive species had succeeded where the mighty council had failed. In the colony's communication center, Neri was speaking with representatives from other worlds. The large screen showed faces of many different species. "We can send you the hybrid seed data," she was saying. "The growing methods are simple. They worked even on our damaged soil." A representative from the Telluri, a species known for their caution, spoke up. "The council has forbidden the sharing of unauthorized biotechnology." Jiho stepped forward. "This isn't advanced technology. It's simple farming. Sharing seeds and knowledge. The council calls it interference, the Teleri said. We call it survival, Neri replied. Later that day, as Taiwan met with his council, a message arrived from the Galactic Center. He read it with surprise. The council is sending an aid ship, he announced. They say they are bringing supplemental resources to assist with our recovery. Commander Park frowned. After 6 months of nothing, they suddenly want to help. They've seen the public opinion shifting, Jaiho said. Many worlds are questioning why humans could help us, but the mighty council could not. The council ship arrived the next day. It was large and impressive, with official markings. A delegation of high-ranking officials stepped out, led by a Makari ambassador. They'd brought cameras to record their visit. The Galactic Council extends its support to the Hanjin people in this difficult time, the ambassador announced in a formal voice. We bring advanced agricultural supplements and medical technology. Taiwan welcomed them politely, but his eyes were cold. Your timing is interesting. Our crisis began 9 months ago. There were procedures to follow, the ambassador said smoothly, assessments to complete. As they walked through the colony, the officials saw humans everywhere. Human doctors working in the medical center, human engineers helping to repair buildings, human farmers teaching new growing methods. We are prepared to offer the Hanjin a special trade agreement, the ambassador said to Taiwan when they reached the fields, in exchange for exclusive rights to your new hybrid grains. Taiwan looked at the healthy fields, then at the human workers who had risked everything to help his people. Thank you for your offer, he said firmly, but we have already formed an exclusive partnership with humanity. They stood beside us when no one else would. The ambassador's face darkened. These humans are not even a second circle species. Their technology is primitive. Nari, who was walking with them, stopped suddenly. When we were starving, she said, their primitive technology fed us. When our children were sick, their primitive medicine healed them. She pointed to the council ship. You bring gifts now that the hard work is done. But we remember who came when we had nothing to offer in return. That evening, as the council delegation prepared to leave, empty-handed and angry, news arrived from other Hanjin worlds. 2 more species, the Teleri and the Vazca, had broken from council directives and were openly sending aid ships to Hanjin colonies. The tide was turning. 2 years had passed since the blight first struck the Hanjin worlds. On the once-dying planet of Seolgi 7, fields of golden grain now stretched to the horizon. The colony had not only recovered but was thriving. In the grand meeting hall, elder son of the Hanjin stood before representatives from 24 different species. Some were small, like the Hanjin. Others were larger and more powerful. All had come in secret. Friends, elder son began, her voice soft but strong. For too long, the Galactic Council has decided who lives and who dies, who deserves help and who does not. Today, we propose a different path. She gestured to Ambassador Lee of Earth, who stood and joined her at the center of the room. The Mutual Aid Accord, Lee announced, holding up a simple document. An agreement between free worlds to help each other in times of need. No rankings, no economic calculations, just neighbors helping neighbors. The room was quiet. What they were discussing was dangerous. The Council controlled trade routes, banking systems, and defense networks. Opposing them meant risk. The Council will not allow this, said a representative from the Vazca, a species with blue skin and 4 eyes. They will cut off our trade. They already restrict our trade, replied a delegate from the Teleri. They already take the best of what we produce and give little in return. A small reptilian creature from the Dax system raised a clawed hand. We are too weak to stand against the Council. They have warships. We have farm tools. Ambassador Lee smiled. Sometimes farm tools change the galaxy more than warships. Over the next 3 days, the delegates talked. They shared stories of Council neglect and calculated cruelty. They discovered they were not alone in their struggles. Slowly, hope began to grow. On the final day, Elder Sun addressed their fears directly. Yes, there is risk, she admitted. But look at what the humans and Hanjin have accomplished together. She waved toward the window, where the healthy fields showed their success. This happened because humans cared more about doing what was right than following council rules. One by one, delegates stepped forward to sign the accord. First, the Hanjin and humans, then the Teleri and Vaska. Soon, all 24 species had signed. As they celebrated their new alliance, an urgent message arrived. Council warships have been detected entering the system. They know, Elder Sun said, her voice steady. Someone told them about our meeting. Ambassador Li touched her arm gently. We knew this might happen. Within an hour, 5 large council ships entered orbit around Sulji 7. A message came from Councillor Jen of the Makari. We have detected an illegal gathering of species on Hanjin territory, Jen's cold voice announced. All delegates are ordered to surrender for questioning. Any resistance will be met with force. The delegates looked at each other with fear. Council punishment could be severe. Then To-1 stepped forward. Tell the council ships they are welcome to land. We have something to show them. When Councillor Jen and his guards arrived at the colony center, they expected to find a frightened group ready to surrender. Instead, they found all 24 delegates standing calmly in the main square. What is the meaning of this illegal assembly? Jen demanded. Elder Sun stepped forward. It is not illegal to invite friends to dinner, Counselor. Do not play games, Jen snapped. We know about your so-called accord. It violates council authority. Ambassador Li joined Elder Sun. The accord violates nothing in the council charter. We have already submitted it for official registration. Zhen's face darkened. The council will never approve such an agreement. If necessary, we will use our authority to prevent it. By authority, do you mean your warships? Tai-1 asked quietly. If necessary, Zhen replied. Tai-1 nodded to Jai-O, who pressed a button on a small device. Suddenly, the sky above the colony lit up as a shield of energy formed around the entire settlement. What is this? Zhen demanded, his confidence flipping for the first time. A planetary defense shield, Jai-Ho explained. Developed through human-Hanjin cooperation. Just one of many innovations born from our work together. Zhen stared at the shield, then at the United Delegates. The galaxy was changing before his eyes. 10 years had passed since the signing of the Mutual Aid Accord. Sulji-7 was no longer a struggling colony, but a thriving world. Where once there had been only farms, now there were beautiful cities with tall buildings that reflected the sunlight. On this special day, thousands of people gathered in the central square of the main city. They were not just Hanjin. There were humans, Teleri, Vaska, and visitors from 24 other worlds. They had come for the Gratitude Festival, held every year to remember how friendship had changed the galaxy. Near the front of the crowd sat 2 elderly men. Tai-1, once the desperate leader of a dying colony, was now the respected governor of a prosperous world. Beside him sat Commander Park, his hair now white, his Earth uniform replaced with comfortable civilian clothes. 10 years, Tai-1 said, looking around at the thriving city. Sometimes I still can't believe it. Park smiled. My grandmother had a saying, when good hearts align, miracles happen. They were waiting for the graduation ceremony of the Sulji-7 Science Academy to begin. The academy was famous across the galaxy. Students from 50 different species came to learn there. How is Earth these days? Tai-1 asked. Growing stronger, Park replied. The Mutual Aid Accord changed everything for us too. We were a small new species when we helped the Hanjin. Now we have friends and allies across the stars. In the decade since the confrontation with Counselor Jen, the galaxy had changed dramatically. The Mutual Aid Accord, once a secret agreement between 24 desperate species, now included over 100 worlds. They had created their own trade networks, defense systems, and scientific exchanges outside of Council control. The Galactic Council still existed, but its power had diminished. Many of the first circle species had been forced to change their ways or lose influence. A hush fell over the crowd as the graduation ceremony began. Young scientists walked onto the stage one by one, receiving their certificates from Elder Sun, now the leader of the entire Hanjin people. Graduating first in her class, announced the academy director, specializing in xenobiology and cooperative agriculture, Dr. Min. Taiwan and Park stood up, clapping loudly as a young Hanjin woman walked confidently across the stage. It was Neri's daughter, the little girl who had once been sick from hunger, who had eaten Park's soup ration during the darkest days of the Blight. Now she was a brilliant scientist whose research was helping feed worlds beyond the Hanjin colonies. Her work combined knowledge from a dozen different species to create sustainable food systems for challenging environments. After the ceremony, as the twin moons of Seoul G7 rose in the evening sky, ships began arriving for the night's celebrations. Each ship was decorated with lights in the pattern of their homeworlds. Taiwan, Park, and Min stood together on a balcony watching the beautiful display. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Min asked the two old men. "Never," Taiwan admitted. "When the Blight first hit, I thought our people were finished. And I never imagined an emergency aid mission would change the power structure of the galaxy," Park added. Min smiled at them both. "My mother says it wasn't just the food or medicine that saved us. It was knowing we weren't alone, that someone cared enough to stand beside us." As they talked, more lights appeared in the sky as ships continued to arrive. The Gratitude Festival would last 3 days. There would be music, food, stories, and laughter shared between species who once barely knew each other existed. At the center of the main square stood a simple monument. It showed a human hand and a Hanjin hand clasped together. The light of the twin moons illuminated the words carved at its base. "When the galaxy turned its back, humanity stood beside us. We shall never forget." Min touched the old men's shoulders gently. "And we never will."